Well, good morning, and welcome to our online life group Sunday school class. You have joined us on a great day. We're starting out a new study of Proverbs. See, Proverbs is known as the book of wisdom. And wisdom. The world could use a lot of wisdom today, couldn't it? But what we forget is true wisdom doesn't come from school or books of philosophy. True wisdom is something only God can give. See, God told Solomon he could have anything he wanted, and Solomon chose wisdom. God gave Solomon wisdom, and Solomon wrote down wisdom in the book of Proverbs. See, before we look at our passage today, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Let's pray that God gives us wisdom through his word, and that we apply that wisdom in our daily lives. Now pause your device and pray that Christians in our country will call out to God for wisdom, that God will grant wisdom to our church leaders and our political leaders as well. Go ahead, pause your device, and pray for these prayer concerns and others that you may know of. Now, what is the difference between wisdom and knowledge? As we discussed last Sunday in our service, you can have a lot of knowledge about a lot of different things, but not have wisdom. Wisdom is seeing and responding to life from God's perspective. The first chapter of Proverbs begins with an invitation and a warning. God's word is a foundation for wisdom, and we see that foolish choices have consequences. We have with us today Bill Tucker, our minister of military. Now, Kit Hintz, our campus pastor at the Southport campus. Now, Cory, our minister of worship and missions, to help us as we look at scripture that we see in chapter 1 of Proverbs. Bill, tell us about Solomon, how Solomon begins this book of wisdom.
As we take a look at the first few verses of our study today, we should keep in mind that it was primarily written by Solomon. And he's obviously known as the wisest man in the world. You've probably heard that before. But we kind of see in 1 Kings chapters 1 through 4 kind of what led to this wisdom being given to him by God. Before Solomon even took control as king, his brother Adonijah was looking to have power in the kingdom. And then, of course, he would have to follow King David, who was the king for 40 years. And so what an amazing challenge that probably was for him as a young king to follow in his father's footsteps. So not too long after he took over in the kingdom, he had asked God for wisdom and really to obey God and to lead God's people. And so God graciously granted this gift of wisdom to Solomon. And we see here that in Proverbs 1, chapter 1, verse 7, the first part, it says, "The fear of crashing is the beginning of a safe flight in an airplane." Does it say that? No, of course it doesn't say that. It says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. But see, pilots have a healthy respect for the reality of gravity and the hardness of the ground. And so they accept this reality as they go fly as kind of the beginning of a safe flight in an airplane. What does this mean, this fear of the Lord? That word Lord there really refers to God's proper name that's used in the Old Testament, Yahweh. But this fear of the Lord really is a reverence and an awe, kind of a respect, rightfully due to the God of the universe. And if you think about it, God created you. God created the universe. It really gets right down to it. If you think about it, 6 months ago, God was preparing the meal that you're going to probably have this next week, that tasty, spicy chicken sandwich. But this reverence and this fear is really just a foundational acknowledgement of a true and actual reality. God does exist, and we should respect him. We should be in awe of him, in awe of his holiness. And so really it's an idea of basically respecting God for who he is, but also understanding who we are, which is fallen, sinful people. In Romans, which is the series that we just studied, in Romans chapter 1, it talks about how people are without excuse, and they understand who God is, and they really have to try very hard to kind of wish away God. And so how about knowledge? In that first section of verse 1:7, it says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Well, what is this knowledge? Well, really, that's just facts and information. Imagine for a moment that you're flying a plane at night, and it's stormy weather, and you want to land the plane safely. But here's what you do. You radio ahead to the air traffic control tower, and you tell them to turn the lights off. And then what you do is you start tearing instruments off of the panel in front of you, the cockpit instruments, and you throw them out the window. And then what you do is you pull out of your pocket your trusty coronavirus mask, and you put it over your eyes, and then you try to land the plane. Obviously, that is not something you would want to do if you're flying an airplane. But in a sense, that's kind of what we do if we refuse God's wisdom and his information that he's provided for us to have a safe journey through this life. Proverbs 1:7, the second part there, says, fools despise wisdom and discipline. This word fool was best defined, I feel like, in our personal study guides that hopefully you got a hold of. But in the front part of that personal study guide are the definitions of key words used throughout the study. And fool was one of those. It says this, a fool is the antithesis or the opposite of a wise person. The Hebrew word suggests stubbornness or moral perversion. The fool arrogantly thinks of himself as without error, and he rejects godly wisdom because it contradicts his own view of knowledge. He detests discipline because discipline involves correction, and correction implies that he made an error. So in a sense, if you think about it, it just means that a fool will decide to go his own way despite the outcome instead of God's way, which is going to be a path of health and basically happiness. Moving on from there, if we start with this idea that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, then we can see this next set of verses by Solomon addressed to his son, one of his sons, possibly Rehoboam, the next king. But he says here, listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and don't regret your mother's teaching, for they will be a garland of favor on your head and pendants around your neck. It's maybe the idea that we see when we see Olympic gold medalists wearing medals around their neck. It's just a sense of, wow, what a great achievement that this person has made, and they've worked so hard and that type of thing. And so we see this idea of honor being paid to someone who's wise. And Solomon's pleading with his son to accept this knowledge that he could receive from his father or his mother. The question I'd have for the younger crowd that might be watching here, children still living with their parents, is do your parents love chaos in life? And the obvious answer is no, they don't. They really want to try to help you get through life as easily as possible, because what this would mean for them is peace in their own life. And so they're going to try to provide you with the best advice that they can give you to help you along your way. And it doesn't mean you have to choose their advice, but at least listen to their advice is, I think, what Solomon is wanting to convey there. So I'll turn it back over to Carl now.
Well, thank you, Bill. In the next verses, Solomon moves from the positive consequences of godly counsel to the devastating consequences of following the wrong counsel. Kit, explain to us Solomon's message in Proverbs 1.
Hey guys, so we've got verses 10 through 14. Let me read those to you. It says this, my son, if sinners entice you, don't be persuaded. If they say, come with us, let's set an ambush and kill someone. Let's attack some innocent person just for fun. Let's swallow them alive like Sheol, still healthy as they go down to the pit. We'll find all kinds of valuable property and fill our houses with plunder. Throw in your lot with us, and we'll all share our money. You may be reading this and you're thinking like murder, robbery. I think I'm good. I don't think I have a problem with this. Maybe it sounds to you like some bad after-school special. The truth is, even though some of us may ask, how could anybody fall into this trap? We all come from different backgrounds, and we're all going to in some way, shape, or form deal with this. Doesn't matter if you're white collar, doesn't matter if you're blue collar, doesn't matter if you come from a rough background, struggling just to get food on the table. All of us can be influenced. And you say, well, who or what can influence me? Well, ultimately, we'll see that sin is the great influencer of all of us. But when it comes to people that we hang out with, like in this text particularly here, it talks about gangs. Gangs can influence depending on what kind of background you come from. But not just gangs. We talk about our friends. We talk about our coworkers. Talk about our neighbors. Talk about our family. All of us in some way, shape, or form are influenced and easily influenced by those that we spend time with. And so ultimately, sin is the ultimate influencer. As we look at this text here, what are we looking at here? We're looking at a get-rich-quick scheme. There's not any among us who haven't thought about an easy way to get money. And that's what we see here in this text. We see these young men going so far as to commit murder just to get money. And so you would say, man, I think I'm good. I don't think I'm going to struggle with that. But I would say, as we look at this, here's what I would recommend we do with this. Here's how I would say we apply this. Two things. Number one, I would say examine your heart. Ultimately, we look here at a sin of covetousness, of greed. And so I'd ask the question, do you have your possessions, or do your possessions have you? And then we look here at the sin of murder, and Jesus is really clear. All sin starts in the heart, right? So we're examining our heart, and Jesus talks about anger is the core sin of murder. And so I would ask you, do you struggle with anger? Do you justify angry outbursts? Do you give full vent to them, or do you seek to confess it? Do you seek to find ways to exercise self-control in your life? And then the other thing I would say is we need to be intentional with our influence. We're looking at a world today, a society today that needs our influence, that needs godly influence. And so I would say people need to hear someone say what is right and what is wrong. They need our words, right? And I would just say our words matter. And then for our parents who are listening, I would say your kids need your influence. They need to hear from you specifically. They need our direction. And so we are called to take time with them and to make time with them. And maybe you're sitting here thinking about this, and maybe you've examined your heart some, and you've examined areas of anger in your life or covetousness, and you say, man, I've blown it already. Well, let me just say a couple things to maybe encourage you. First of all, we've all blown it. None of us are perfect. I would say this: whatever influence you have, use it and trust God with the results. The other thing I would say is confess your failures, right? Own them. And then get back up and keep trying. In short, I would just say this: persevere and trust the God who redeems.
Appreciate that, Kit. You know, in the last part of this passage we're studying today, Solomon discusses the results of sin. Cory, tell us about verses 15 to 19 in Proverbs 1.
Proverbs 1, 15 through 19 says, "My son, do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your foot from their paths. For their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. For in vain is a net spread in the sight of any bird, but these men lie in wait for their own blood. They set an ambush for their own lives. Such are the ways of everyone who is greedy for unjust gain. It takes away the life of its possessors." Solomon begins by encouraging his son to resist temptation. The temptation he was facing was falling in with the wrong crowd. Solomon says not to travel the road they travel, and not even to take one step on the path. What he's basically saying is sin will take you a mile if you give it an inch. So in verse 19, he continues about getting profit dishonestly. We see the sin that this group is committing, and the sin is making a profit dishonestly. Greed is one of the 7 deadly sins, and is arguably one of the first sins. In the Garden of Eden, the serpent told Eve that she could be like God. Greed took over her heart, and she and Adam gave into it. We see more examples throughout the major and minor prophets in the Bible. Ezekiel pointed to the greed of God's people as he confronted them with their sins that led them into captivity, which is in Ezekiel 22:27. Habakkuk also had to confront God's people for their sinful actions that had been fostered by their greedy ways, which is in Habakkuk 2:6-12. Every time we see somebody profit dishonestly in the Bible, their greed destroys them. Ignoring God's wisdom still puts a person's life in jeopardy. For that reason, mature Christians should eagerly seek God's wisdom through his word. We want to please him and not ourselves. For that reason, we reject greed.
Now, Solomon made it clear that humans have the choice to listen to godly wisdom or be enticed by sin. He also laid the foundation that wisdom starts with a right relationship with God. See, in what areas do you need to be more obedient to God and his word? This week, pray thanking God for being the source of wisdom. I want to again encourage you, as I did this past Sunday, that if you are not in a Bible study, to begin reading a chapter of Proverbs each day. I want to encourage you to do that. Also, if you would like to have a curriculum that we're going through as we study the book of Proverbs, call the church office at 850-785-6530 or email me at cfondren@highlandpark.org, and we'll be sure and send you a book so you can follow along with us. And let me just remind you, as you know, we have 3 services on campus happening today at 8 o'clock, at 9:30, and 11 o'clock. And remember, our online service is at 9:30. Be sure to join one of those. And again, let me just thank you for joining us here today. Now, God bless you, and we love you, and look forward to seeing you next time.